Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Joseph Musia. Welcome to my podcast, Joe Talks Politics. South Africa heads to its 7th democratic national and provincial elections on the 29th of May. One of the buzzwords in political circles is coalitions. In this episode, I look at the possible scenarios and what they could mean for the country. Let's get into it. Several polls indicate that the ANC, the governing party of the past 30 years, is unlikely to garner more than 50% of the votes in the coming national elections. Some place it below 40%, while others say it will be in the mid 40% range. This gets us into the discussion about possible coalitions, as for the first time in the democratic era, it could be that no single party is in a position to form a government. If we have learned anything from local councils, it is that political parties in this country put their own interests ahead of those of the voting public. Joburg, Ekurhuleni, Tshwane in Gauteng, and Nelson Mandela Bay in the Eastern Cape have been beset by instability since the ANC lost control and smaller parties have become so-called kingmakers. Single-member parties have been able to hold more power than the electorate intended. At the drop of a hat, one party decides they are unhappy with their current partners and jumps into bed with another who promises them better perks. We are now in that situation nationally and in several provinces. Many have speculated about who could get into bed with whom. Today, however, I want to look into why some coalitions could present opportunities and which could lead the country down the path of disaster. If the ANC obtains over 45% of votes, there is a likelihood it could rope in one or two of the smaller parties to help it continue in government. The most obvious is the Inkatha Freedom Party and perhaps one or two others. The ANC and the IFP have governed together in the past, albeit with the IFP being an invitee rather than a significant partner. Until the fallout between the then President Thabo Mbeki and IFP leader Mangosuthu Buthelezi, after the latter was snubbed for a cabinet position in 2004, several senior IFP members were part of the executive. Cooperation between these two parties could bode well for the country, as both have experience in governance. After all, the IFP governed KwaZulu-Natal from 1994 to 2004. As stated before, some of its leaders were part of the national executive until then. It continues to run several municipalities in KwaZulu-Natal. This experience could put it in an ideal position to play an effective role in government while at the same time ensuring the country remains stable. The IFP is, however, not the force it was in 2004 when it won almost 7% of the votes nationally. In the last elections in 2019, the party scraped past 3%, which was an improvement on the previous elections. This means the ANC could be forced to look for additional partners. This is where things become a little tricky. All the parties below the Freedom Front Plus obtained less than 1% of the votes in 2019. Many of them are unlikely to return after the 29th. It is therefore too risky to even speculate on who is likely to be roped in. The other option is for parties in the multi-party charter to try and form a government. This is a long shot, however, given that when one excludes the ANC and EFF, the charter parties on current strength do not even make 40% of parties in parliament. Then we look at the possibility of the ANC and EFF burying the hatchet and working together. This scenario is possible, some say, if the faction that supports ANC Deputy President Paul Mashatile manages to oust Cyril Ramaphosa following the elections. He is seen as more sympathetic to Malema's party than the incumbent, who has fought bitter battles with the Red Berets over several issues. When one takes the EFF's record in coalitions in local government into consideration, this scenario represents a great deal of instability for the country going forward. Their tendency to support issues based on how they feel on a given day has led to disaster in many municipalities, more specifically the big Gauteng metros. What then about the ANC and the DA forgetting their campaign slogans and working together for the benefit of the country? For election purposes, the two parties have maintained they would exclude each other from any possible coalition talks. If the interests of the country, and only the interests of the country, were to be central to the two parties' thinking, and assuming their combined strength is above 60%, South Africa could be off to a good start. Even though the ANC is unlikely to retain its absolute majority, chances are that it will still be the largest single party in parliament. The idea of keeping it completely out of the national government is a recipe for disaster. Whoever gets to form a coalition that excludes the ANC will never be able to govern in peace. This is because there will always be a threat that, should there be a fallout, their partners could easily turn to the ANC to replace them. This party has, however, lost its way. Its credibility is in tatters, as scandal after scandal has shown it incapable of doing even basic things right in government. After 6 attempts, the country's economy is in shambles. Unemployment, poverty and crime are rampant. Important institutions are on their knees, and there is a general sense of hopelessness. The DA, meanwhile, has proven itself in running effective governments. The Auditor General's reports have shown year in and year out that municipalities under DA control are the best run in the country. Compared to other provinces, the Western Cape looks like a haven of good governance. This is even as people who live in the province can point to clear gaps, especially services for poor communities. Even though the two parties don't see eye to eye ideologically, leveraging each other's strength and acting as both partner and watchdog could be a boon for the country's future. There are, however, hardliners on both sides who will ensure that this remains only but a dream. So hold on tight, South Africa. There is turbulence ahead.